There are places the wind refuses to carry a whisper, not because it can't, but because it's afraid of what it might wake. It began with silence. Not the kind that fills a room after a gunshot, or the kind that comes when someone dies, but something deeper, older. A silence that felt alive. The people who lived near Hollow Creek used to say the valley could listen. That if you spoke your fears out loud near those woods, the creek would remember them, and echo them back years later. Before we step deeper into this story, where are you watching from? The strange how far tales like this travel. Because this one, the story of the Crow family, shouldn't have survived at all. If you drive through Greenbrier County today, you'll find no trace of Hollow Creek. The maps show blank ridges where farms once stood. The road that used to cut through the valley, gone. Buried by time or maybe by choice. But there are fragments. Old letters. Court ledgers. Newspaper clippings written in cautious, half-believing tones. They all mention the same thing. A family who vanished without a trace, leaving behind a house that nobody would claim. Silas Crow built that house with his own hands in 1849. He was a logger, part of a long line of men who cut more wood than they grew. His wife, Margaret, wasn't from around here. Some said she came from the old country. Others whispered she came from the mountains themselves, the way mist comes and goes without explanation. They had 4 children: Nathaniel, Eliza, Thomas, and little Samuel. For years, nothing about them seemed unusual, until the winter the singing began. The first person to hear it was a trapper named Jeb Harland. He'd been tracking a wounded deer when he came across the Crow property. It was late, cold enough that his beard froze to his collar, and just as he was about to turn back, he heard a woman's voice drifting through the trees. Not words, not quite melody either. Something in between, like the sound of a lullaby remembered wrong. When Jeb told the others at the tavern, they laughed at first. But then came others. Travelers, soldiers, drifters, all saying the same thing. They'd heard singing in the mist, coming from a house that glowed faintly through the fog. No one dared get close. That winter, 3 men disappeared near Hollow Creek. Their names were recorded once and then crossed out. Quick question. How did you find this story? Was it chance? Or something darker pulling you here? By the following spring, Sheriff Clayton Marsh rode out to the Crow home after a local merchant vanished. He never filed a report, never spoke of what he saw, but his deputy noticed his hair had gone almost entirely white when he returned. A week later, a new fence appeared around the Crow property. Tall, made from oak planks cut fresh from the hills. Nobody saw who built it. The fence stood for 10 years. And then, one morning in 1872, smoke began to rise from inside the valley. When neighbors followed the trail, they found the fence broken, and the Crow house in ruins. Inside, nothing but ash. No bodies. No sign of struggle. Just silence. And under that silence, something breathing. A century later, a historian named Clara Wexler discovered the Crow file while researching Civil War deserters. The deeper she looked, the stranger it became. Letters between officials mentioned bribes, missing witnesses, and a single line scribbled in a margin by an unknown clerk. Do not reopen the Crow case. The ground remembers. That phrase appears again, carved into the stone of the only remaining foundation wall from the Crow homestead. The letters are uneven, but deep, as though written by someone who wanted to be sure it would never be forgotten. The foundation still stands, hidden under moss and fog. And if you listen closely, sometimes you can still hear singing. If you're still here, you're part of the few who know the truth. Hit subscribe to stay close. Because in Chapter 2, we descend beneath the ashes, and what sleeps under Hollow Creek finally begins to stir. When a house burns, most people see an ending, but some fires don't destroy, they uncover. By the time the morning fog cleared, Hollow Creek looked less like a tragedy and more like a wound. The Crow home had been reduced to blackened ribs of timber and stone, the ground beneath still warm, as if something beneath the ashes was breathing out. It was 1872, and what the sheriff found there that day was enough to bury an entire town's history. They came in silence, 4 men with shovels, 1 with a cross, and Sheriff Marsh riding last. The woods were still damp from the night rain. The earth steamed. They didn't speak much. No one wanted to say what they already suspected. That the Crow family hadn't simply fled. That maybe they hadn't gone anywhere at all. The sheriff's horse wouldn't cross the fence line. His hooves dug into the soil, trembling. So he went in alone. What he found under the ash wasn't a body. Not exactly. Near the hearth, buried just beneath the char, lay a shape. Too small to be human, too deliberate to be natural. A mound of clay. Smooth, perfectly round. Embedded with what looked like animal teeth. When he touched it, it cracked open. And from inside came a smell like iron and rain. Inside the clay shell were bones, bird bones, woven together with human hair. He buried it again that same night. But he never forgot it. Quick question. How did you find this story? Was it chance? Or something darker pulling you here? 100 years later, Clara Wexler, the historian who found the Crow file, returned to that same spot. By then, Hollow Creek was nothing more than a ghost of a clearing. She carried with her a metal detector, an old journal, and a rumor that somewhere under the ruins, the sheriff had hidden something. The first day brought nothing. The second, only old nails and melted glass. But on the third day, her spade struck something solid. A box no bigger than a loaf of bread, wrapped in rusted iron wire. She took it home, cleaned it carefully, and inside found a fragment of burned paper. And beneath that, a child's wooden toy bird. On its underside, someone had carved 2 words with a dull blade. Still singing. That night, Clara woke to the faint sound of a lullaby echoing from her living room. Low, broken, but familiar. The next morning, she sealed the box again. And that's when she noticed her hands had turned gray, as if dusted in fine ash. Weeks later, she wrote to the Greenbrier Historical Society. I found something at Hollow Creek. Something I don't think should be opened again. They never replied. But the following month, a man came to her office. Tall, pale, dressed in a black wool coat despite the July heat. He didn't introduce himself. Just asked one question. Did you hear the song? Clara froze. How do you know about? He smiled. It doesn't stop once you've heard it. It follows. Then he left. No name, no address, only the smell of damp wood and smoke lingering in the air. Inside the sheriff's original files, now archived at the Greenbrier Courthouse, there's one last note, undated and signed, written in a shaky hand. She was not a witch. She was trying to keep it asleep. The pronoun was never explained. But when researchers compared the handwriting, it matched none of the recorded deputies. Meaning, someone else had access to those files. And whoever they were, they knew the Crows didn't summon something, they contained it. Do you think Margaret Crow was cursed? Or chosen? Tell me below, I read every theory. By the late 1970s, the valley was scheduled to be flooded as part of a state reservoir project. But when engineers began surveying, their instruments malfunctioned. Compasses spun. Metal detectors whined. One of the crew, a man named Robert Fields, recorded in his notes. Ground feels hollow, like something's moving beneath. The next day he went missing. His boots were found at the water's edge, facing the ruins. Locals say the project was abandoned because of cost overruns. But the records tell a different story. Funding pulled abruptly after multiple unexplained disappearances. To this day, Hollow Creek is untouched. And every spring, when the thaw begins, locals swear they can hear the water hum. Not rush, not flow, hum. If you're still here, you're part of the few who know the truth. Hit subscribe to stay close. Because in Chapter 3, The Healer's Secret, we finally learn what Margaret Crow was trying to hide, and what she sacrificed to keep the valley alive. There's a difference between saving a life and stealing it back from the dark. Margaret Crow never learned which one she did. By the time the war ended, Hollow Creek had already been at war with itself. The land was rich, the soil dark as coffee grounds. But nothing grew right anymore. Corn came up crooked. Roots bled when pulled. And those who drank from the creek began to dream the same dream. A figure, pale and faceless, walking through fog, whispering in a language no one could name. The preacher blamed the crows. The townsfolk didn't need much convincing. Margaret Crow had a gift, or so they said. She could pull fever out of a man with her hands, cure a child's lung sickness with boiled bark and river clay. But every gift came with a cost. Her children learned not to ask questions when she came home pale, trembling, eyes glassy as ice water. Sometimes she'd vanish for hours, into the woods or down by the creek. When she came back, she smelled of smoke and iron. Nathaniel, her eldest, once followed her in secret. He told his sister Eliza what he saw, that their mother was digging near the water, muttering words into the soil, and burying something small wrapped in linen. When Eliza asked what, he said, "It was moving." One evening, a neighbor's boy fell ill. His fever wouldn't break, and by dawn the doctor had given up. Silas Crow brought Margaret to him. She laid her hands on the child's chest, whispered a prayer, and before the room exhaled, the boy sat up, breathing, smiling, alive. The family called it a miracle. But that same night, Margaret's youngest, Samuel, began coughing blood. He never got better. Silas stopped speaking to her for a week, then a month. When she tried to explain, he only said, "You don't heal, you trade." After Samuel's death, the river began to swell without rain. The old logs from the mill started drifting back upstream, against the current, as if the water itself had reversed. And at night, from the edge of the woods, came the sound of children laughing. Only there were no children left in Hollow Creek. They'd all been sent away months before. One night, Margaret stood on the porch and watched the fog roll in. Her hands were shaking. She whispered something to the dark. "It's not done with me yet." Silas heard her. And the next morning, he took the wagon into town to speak with the sheriff. He never came back. Quick question. How did you find this story? Was it chance? Or something darker pulling you here? When Clara Wexler found the Crow family's remaining possessions, one item stood out. A small leather journal written in Margaret's hand. The ink had bled with age, but the final pages were still legible. "The creek hums when it's hungry. I thought it wanted the sickness. I thought it wanted mercy. But it wants memory. And I have nothing left to give it but my own." Tucked inside the journal was a piece of cloth, brittle gray, dusted with ash. Clara sent it for analysis. The report came back. Animal fiber, human hair, and traces of salt. A binding cloth, used in old folk rituals meant to contain something, not summon it. Margaret wasn't feeding the darkness. She was keeping it asleep. They say a storm rolled in that night, the one that burned the Crow house to the ground. But witnesses said there was no lightning, just fire, blooming from the inside out, and a sound like the earth itself exhaling. If Margaret Crow lit that fire, it wasn't out of madness. It was mercy, because what she had sealed beneath that home, the thing humming under the floorboards, whispering through her dreams, wasn't a ghost. It was hunger wearing a memory's face. Do you think Margaret Crow was cursed or chosen? Tell me below. I read every theory. If you're still here, you're part of the few who know the truth. Hit subscribe to stay close. Because in Chapter 4, The Sheriff's Debt, we uncover what Clayton Marsh promised to the Crows, and what it cost him to keep that promise. You can bury the dead, but not the promises you made to them. Clayton Marsh was not a brave man, not in the way stories like to remember sheriffs. He carried the law like a burden, not a badge. And long after the Crow fire, when the rest of Greenbrier County tried to forget, he couldn't. Because he'd seen what the others hadn't. And he'd made a promise that burned longer than the flames. The day after the fire, Marsh found himself back at Hollow Creek. He told no one. He claimed later he was there to confirm the ashes, to ensure the family's remains could be recorded. But the truth was simpler. He'd been called. A letter had been left at his doorstep, its edges singed, its writing barely legible. "Come alone. You owe me this. MC." He went at dawn, pistol holstered but unloaded, because deep down he already knew bullets wouldn't help. The house was gone. Only the stone foundation remained, still warm. And at the center of it all, Margaret Crow sat on the ground, alive, burned, but breathing. She didn't look at him when he approached. Her voice was hoarse, every word pulled from her lungs like smoke. "It's done," she said. "But it will come back. You have to promise me something." Marsh knelt beside her. "What did you do?" "Not what they think. I didn't summon it. I bound it. The land doesn't forget. It keeps everything. The only way to hold it was through blood." She lifted her left hand, showing him a cut across her palm, still fresh, still weeping. "If someone unearths it, if they dig where the creek turns black, it will wake. And if it wakes, the valley will drown in it." Marsh wanted to run. Every instinct screamed that the woman before him was mad. But when she turned her head, he saw the reflection of something moving behind her eyes. A shimmer, faint but alive, like firelight seen through water. "Swear it," she whispered. "Swear you'll keep them away." He did, and she smiled, not kindly, not cruelly, just the way someone does when they know they've finally won. By sunrise, she was gone. No body, no footprints, only the smell of iron and the faint sound of the creek humming again. For years afterward, Marsh bought the surrounding land in secret. Every acre around Hollow Creek became his, or rather, untouchable. He filed the deeds under false names, blocked access roads, bribed surveyors. And every few months, he'd ride out there alone, stop by the fence line and listen. Sometimes he said he heard her voice, sometimes a child's laughter, sometimes just the water whispering beneath the earth. He started keeping a journal. The entries grew shorter over time, more frantic. May 3rd, 1875. The fence is cracking. June 18th, 1875. The birds stopped coming. August 2nd, 1875. I saw her reflection in the water again. The final entry simply read, "It wants me now." He shot himself 2 days later. Quick question. How did you find this story? Was it chance? Or something darker pulling you here? In 1949, Clayton Marsh's great-grandson, a preacher named Elijah, reopened the old property lines, claiming God had called him to purify the valley. He and 3 parishioners set up camp by the creek. They were never seen again. The state police report from that year listed the official cause as flooding, but the weather logs show no rain that week, only heavy mist that never lifted. When Clara Wexler reviewed the file a century later, she recognized the signature on the land deed. See, Marsh, the same hand that had once promised Margaret Crow he'd keep everyone away. It seemed that even death couldn't void that contract. Locals say that on quiet nights, when the moon hangs low and the water sits still, you can see shapes moving just beneath the surface. Not reflections, movements, as if the earth itself were dreaming. An old fisherman once told a reporter, "If you stay long enough, you start to hear it hum, like it's remembering your name." Clara visited the site in 1974. She didn't stay long, but before she left, she took a soil sample. When tested, it showed abnormal magnetism and traces of human bone. She never returned to Hollow Creek, but she started writing letters to herself, found years later among her papers. It keeps its promises. If you're still here, you're part of the few who know the truth. Hit subscribe to stay close. Because in Chapter 5, The Trial of Memory, the past refuses to stay buried, and the town of Greenbrier faces the reckoning Margaret Crow warned about. When a town forgets its sins, it doesn't cleanse them, it feeds them. There are stories that live quietly in old journals, and then there are those that claw their way back into the world. For Greenbrier County, the story of the Crow family was both. Written in whispers, hidden in records, and waiting for someone foolish enough to open the wrong box. That someone was a man named Dr. William Teller, a local historian who didn't believe in ghosts. He would change that opinion before the end of the summer. It was 1984 when the state announced plans to finally develop the Hollow Creek Valley. A dam, a reservoir, and maybe, if the land cooperated, a small power station. The locals protested quietly at first, not for spiritual reasons, but because they'd grown up with the old warnings. Don't build near the water. It remembers. But when the construction crew broke ground, The valley seemed to sigh, a long, low sound that rippled through the fog and made their equipment shudder. The first day, one of the backhoes uncovered stone foundations. The second, they hit bones. At first, the coroner said they were animal. Then came the teeth, human. Dozens of them, buried in tight, ritualistic circles. Dr. Teller, thrilled by the discovery, ordered an immediate dig. He called it the Trial of Memory, a tongue-in-cheek name meant to challenge local superstition. He shouldn't have mocked it. Within a week, half the crew had quit. They said the air was wrong, heavy, humming, metallic. Men complained of headaches, nausea, nightmares. One said he saw a woman standing in the mist, holding a lantern, whispering names he couldn't quite hear. Teller wrote in his field notes, auditory hallucinations widespread, fog density inconsistent with weather data, electrical malfunctions increasing. I may be experiencing symptoms myself. He didn't stop. He couldn't. When word spread that the state might be desecrating a historical site, an emergency hearing was called at the Greenbrier courthouse. Locals filled every seat. Some came clutching old family Bibles. Others brought faded photographs of the valley before it vanished from maps. Clara Wexler, frail now but still sharp, sat in the back row. When Dr. Teller presented his findings, ritualistic structures, no verifiable evidence of human habitation, she stood and interrupted. Her voice, thin but clear, "You've already woken it." The room went silent. Teller smiled politely, the way men do when they think an old woman has lost her mind. But when she walked to the front and placed a small wooden bird on the table, the one carved with the words "still singing," the lights flickered. For 3 seconds, every bulb in the courthouse went dark. When they came back on, the bird was gone. And outside, the rain started, though no clouds were in the sky. Quick question. How did you find this story? Was it chance? Or something darker pulling you here? It rained for 6 days straight. Not heavy. Not even enough to flood. Just a slow, steady drizzle that never stopped. Locals said it didn't sound like rain. It sounded like humming. By the third night, the creek overflowed its banks. Fish washed up gray and eyeless. And in the mist, witnesses saw shapes moving against the current. Pale, human-sized, walking rather than floating. Dr. Teller stayed on site through the storm. His final tape recording was found inside his tent, waterlogged but intact. The humming is beneath the ground now. It's close. I think it's coming from under the hearth foundation. I can hear it breathing. God help us. I think it knows my name. He was never found. After the storm broke, the state declared Hollow Creek unsafe and sealed the valley again. This time permanently. They called it a geological hazard zone. But those who'd been there knew better. The sheriff's descendants stopped talking to reporters. Clara Wexler died 3 months later, leaving a single envelope marked, "Do not open until the water stills." No one ever did. Today, the old courthouse in Greenbrier is a library. On its second floor, there's a display case labeled Local Folklore Artifacts. Inside, one rusted lantern, a sheriff's badge, and a yellowed photograph of the Crow homestead before the fire. But if you visit on a rainy night, the staff will warn you not to stay past closing. Not because of ghosts, they'll say, because sometimes the building hums, and if you listen too closely, you might hear your own name whispered back. If you're still here, you're part of the few who know the truth. Hit subscribe to stay close. Because in Chapter 6, The Historian's Descent, we follow the letters Clara Wexler left behind and discover that the story didn't end in the valley. It followed her home. Sometimes the truth doesn't haunt the living. It recruits them. When Clara Wexler died in 1985, her colleagues said she passed quietly in her sleep. That wasn't true. She had spent her final week writing, page after page, a confession no one was meant to read. The letter she left behind wasn't a suicide note. It was a map, and the first line was simple. If you're reading this, you've already heard it. After Clara's death, her niece, Marianne, inherited a small collection of her things. Books, letters, and an old reel-to-reel recorder. She didn't touch it for months. Then one night, during a thunderstorm, the recorder switched itself on. At first, it was only static. Then came Clara's voice. June 14th. It's in the house now. Not a ghost, an echo. I can hear the creak inside the walls. It hums when I write. A few seconds later, another sound joined her. Faint, rhythmic, like breathing through water. Marian stopped the tape. But when she pressed play again, Clara's voice whispered directly into the mic. Don't stop listening. It moves when you stop. The boxes Clara left behind were a scholar's nightmare. Unmarked files, cryptic labels, and fragments of burned photographs. But one folder stood out. It was labeled Crow, Posthumous Activity. Inside, she had tracked every strange occurrence tied to the Hollow Creek area after 1872. Livestock born without eyes, houses that burned with no apparent ignition, people hearing lullabies at night despite living miles from the valley. Each entry ended with the same note, written in Clara's increasingly shaky handwriting. Memory contagion increasing, boundaries unstable. She had begun to believe the curse wasn't bound to the land anymore. It had found a new vessel, remembrance itself. Every person who tried to study it, speak it, or record it became part of the story. The act of remembering fed it. Quick question. How did you find this story? Was it chance? Or something darker pulling you here? Marianne eventually visited Hollow Creek herself, or what was left of it. By then, the dam had been built, and most of the valley was underwater. But when she stood on the overlook, she swore she could see faint ripples where no wind touched the surface. That night, back in her motel room, she found her notebook soaked, though she hadn't gone near the water. The pages had warped, and words she hadn't written bled through the paper. Still singing, she left the next morning without checking out. Her car was found abandoned on Route 219, engine running, radio humming faintly on a dead station. No one ever found her. 2 years later, the library in Greenbrier received an unmarked envelope post-dated from Hollow Creek. Inside was a single Polaroid. The image showed the ruins of the Crow Foundation, half-submerged, water-calm, and mirror-like. But in the reflection, standing in the doorway, was a woman. Not Margaret, not Clara, someone else. Scrawled on the back. It chose. The handwriting matched Clara Wexler's. But the postmark came 2 years after her death. There's a final tape, one that the archivists keep locked in the restricted section of the Greenbrier Library. It's labeled simply The Descent. The recording is damaged, but a few moments are clear. Clara's voice is slower, distorted, like she's underwater. It doesn't want to be forgotten. Every time we tell the story, it grows stronger. We are its mouth now. The humming isn't in the ground anymore. It's in us. Then, faintly, another voice, overlapping hers, speaking in a low, foreign tone. You can almost make out the words before the tape ends with a single sound. Water dripping, and then silence. Some stories don't end. They dissolve into the air, waiting for someone to breathe them in again. The Hollow Creek Reservoir sits still these days. No ripples, no birds, no boats. Just a mirror of gray water surrounded by trees that don't grow straight, each trunk bending slightly toward the center, as if listening. People still come here. Fishermen, campers, the occasional curious traveler who's heard the old legend. They take pictures, post them online, write small captions about the creepy beauty of it all, and every once in a while someone disappears. In 1996, a rescue diver named Alan Pierce was hired by the state to recover a maintenance drone that had gone offline at the bottom of the reservoir. He went down once. He didn't come back up. When they found his oxygen tank days later, the gauge was full, but his regulator was gone. Pulled clean off, the strap frayed like something had bitten through it. The camera attached to his suit captured only 7 minutes of footage. Halfway through, a faint humming starts. Low, rhythmic, vibrating through the water. At the 6-minute mark, the light catches something below him. The outline of a structure, half buried in silt. A stone foundation, and beside it, a figure standing perfectly still, looking up. The image distorts before his scream cuts the feed. In 2003, the Greenbrier Library finally digitized Clara Wexler's materials. The intern assigned to the project, a quiet student named Leah Quinn, began cataloging the Crow collection. She lasted 3 days. Her supervisor found her sitting in the archive room, headphones on, eyes wide open, whispering the same phrase over and over. "It remembers me." The recorder was still playing, the last surviving tape of Clara's voice. But when the supervisor pressed rewind, the reel turned on its own, stopping at a part no one had cataloged before. Clara's voice, calm this time. "You're not listening to me. You're listening with me." Then silence. The file was never made public. 20 years later, in 2023, a new researcher reopened the Hollow Creek case. Her name isn't important. She claimed she wanted to separate truth from folklore. But she made one mistake. She read everything. Every letter, every note, every transcript. In her journal's final entry, she wrote, "I think the humming is only silence stretched too thin. And the silence is hungry." Her phone was found on her desk, still recording. The last thing it captured wasn't her voice. It was water, slow, deliberate drips hitting the floor. Then a whisper. A child's voice. Still singing. The reservoir is still there, but locals say the water level is dropping, only by inches, barely noticeable. If it keeps receding, by 2030, the ruins of Hollow Creek will surface again. And if they do, something else will too. The humming has already returned. Not from the ground. Not from the air. From us. Every time the story is told, the silence stirs, reaching for the next voice to carry it, to remember it, to keep it alive. And so, by listening, by remembering, you've become part of it now. The creek doesn't want your fear. It wants your attention. Before we step away from this story, tell me, do you believe the crows were cursed or chosen? Because either way, they were never forgotten, and neither are you. If this tale pulled you in, subscribe before the next moon rises. The next story is already waiting. And if it stayed with you, share it. Thank you for keeping old legends alive.